wires.
Yeah, you have no option.
Yeah,
it's gotta be.
It's real simple. Yeah,
Right.
it's going to be black, and it's going to have this conductor in it.
This
and
insulation,
in
this
fact,
method.
and this company happens to make a gazillion feet of this a year. Videos ago, we had someone comment about, they were asking us basically, because we make cables. They're like, well, the guy's like, I'm assuming it's a guy, don't know, I think it was. He's like, why is it that headphone companies some of them come with such bad cables? And I mean, to us, it's kind of simple because we make cables for a living. It's because they don't make cables. That's why it comes with bad cables.
Well,
they don't do it.
A little bit more to it than that.
Yeah.
Like
Okay,
always,
we can
right?
expand on it.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue is consumers. And by that, I mean consumers typically don't care about cables. So manufacturers say, well, if you don't care, why should we care? We have to make the cheapest cable that is functional. And they tend to ignore the ergonomics. Because inevitably the reality is if you want a nice cable that feels nice, irrespective of whether or not you say it makes a difference in the sound, it's expensive compared to making a cheap, just a regular cable. It could be very expensive. And if you have custom conductors or cables or molds made or whatever to fit a certain diameter conductor, then you can't just replace the cable willy-nilly because now you need new molds cut to do the injection ends and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's the trial and error process
expensive.
That gets you. I mean, if you're going to run custom conductors or even just good copper through extrusion machines and then have this, okay, so let's back up. When we have cables made, we supply a spec sheet for them. Now the spec sheet, the cable makers, people that make cables, and assuming let's say you're using copper, so you're not even bothering a custom conductor, right? You got to give the cable vendor, the cable manufacturer a spec sheet. It tells them the materials, the insulation materials, the thickness of the insulation on each conductor, how the conductors are twisted or cabled, the spacing, any fillers that go in it, what are the fillers made of, how much filler content you're going to have, the outer jacket material that's covering the wires, how thick is it, what's it made of, the printing on it, the finish on it, the color on it, of the various, all these things. So there has to be, you can't just go and say, just make me a black cable. I'm good with that. They're going to be like, what?
That's not how it works, yeah.
No, they won't do it. They'll be like, no, sorry, this is not how we want us to make you a cable. You're going to need to tell us how to make it.
Be a bit more specific.
We don't know what you want. And you got to think about this. What people don't understand is that the people that make cables, the companies that make cables, don't make headphone cables. They make cables that go under the ocean. They make cables that go in space. They make cables that go in cars. They don't care where it goes. They give us a spec and we'll make a cable for you.
That's right.
So they don't know. They don't even know what you want. They don't really know what you want. They're not headphone users. They're cable makers. They extrude plastic over conductors, and it's a messy job when you look at it. When you look at the inside.
Well, there's practically an unlimited amount of ways you can make a cable, and I think people don't quite grasp that. But you look at a cable and you say, "Well, it's a cable, right? Cables." That's not even close to true. There's an immense amount of ways you could just cover a conductor. You could have it so there's like a powder over the conductors so they slide a little easier or whatever.
Or
you could have it so there's a Teflon wrap,
or
plastic, a paper. I mean, there's like 500 different things, foils and stuff like that, mesh. 100 different things you could cover with it. They all do different things. They all cost different amounts of money. They all perform different tasks. And all these things have an influence on how the cable feels, how it performs, irrespective of how it could potentially alter the sound. But the reality is the mechanical things are massive. There's huge variation.
And then you also have actually variation in the manufacturing process. I mean, machines are basically twisting the wire. Machines are extruding the plastics. But there's variables to the thickness, the wall thickness of the plastics. They keep it within a certain tolerance, but it's not the same all the time.
Yeah.
You could run 5,000 feet of conductor, 5,000 feet of cable and put an outer jacket on, and the jacket might be a little thinner in some places. I mean, it's thinner for 100 feet or 1,000 feet, and maybe it's a little thicker at the beginning or thinner at the end, and there's a tolerance to all this. So you could even have variation within a batch of wire.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we got a whole batch one time, and it was like the it was so thin that you can actually see the conductor through, the plastic.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, all of it was like that though.
Yeah.
So the whole thing
It
was
wa- it was consistent.
it was consistently
Now,
out
see,
of tolerance.
that would make for a very flexible cable, though.
Well, the trouble with these things is, since consumers generally overwhelmingly say they don't care about the cable, manufacturers will just accept these things. Maybe it's out of spec, or maybe they don't know what the spec should be. They get a cable, they say, well, it's a cable, it works, and they ship it because they don't want to scrap a huge amount of cable,
You really can't.
right? Because it's just the cost is so high. And so that's unfortunately the reality of the situation. People make a cable, they go, well, maybe it isn't exactly what we hoped for, but when we contacted the cable vendor, they didn't know either, right? They make everything. They didn't know, like, for our application, what's the best cable you could do cheap. And even if you go to like a cable company that has made cables for other headphone manufacturers, they don't really understand the headphone industry. They don't know, well, this is something that's going to provide your headphone with an advantage.
Well, that's
they don't
why-
understand, right?
Yeah, well, and that's why like a lot of the aftermarket cables that you see are basically handmade.
Right.
And
They're made for specific headphones.
They can buy the conductor already made with insulation on it.
Yeah.
Twist it or braid it together in short lengths to make a cable and make it feel the way they want. It's very labor intensive, which
But
you're
low
not gonna,
upfront cost. That's the difference,
Well,
right?
that's
You're
the
not spending $50,000 to get a conductor made.
right.
You're spending a minimal amount to buy a stock conductor and making it by hand.
Yeah, which is the labor involved is what makes the cables costly,
Right.
versus a machine just spitting out the stuff
Well, yeah.
and then someone terminating it and throwing it onto which again, it doesn't mean that it has to be cheap. But if you're after a price point, like you want the cable to cost $2.
Yeah, you have no option.
Yeah,
It's gotta be.
It's real simple. Yeah,
Right.
it's going to be black, and it's going to have this conductor in it.
This
and
insulation,
in
this
fact,
method.
and this company happens to make a gazillion feet of this a year, and all you're doing is using an existing cable and maybe having your name put on it.
But I mean, you also need to know like specific use cases when you're making a cable, because like with a 1266, the connectors people are probably going to use. They're going to probably be using 4 pins or dual 3 pins, and which in a normal like $200 headphone, well, that's you would never put a 4 pin.
Yeah, you got much smaller connectors
Yeah.
to work with. Therefore, you can't use large conductors.
That too, yeah.
Because it's really difficult to terminate.
Plus, is it detachable? Not detachable? I mean,
yeah.
Well, on top of that, smaller diameter cables tend to be much more costly to manufacture if you want them to actually work. If you want a strong cable that's small, it costs way more than just a big cable. So if you have a cable where it's going to be subjected to mechanical strain, or you as a manufacturer just don't want to worry about warranty issues with cables breaking, just make it big, right? It's cheap. Put a big conductor on it, big, thick insulation.
But then it's
make
heavy.
it chunky.
Right.
Then it's heavy,
Stiff.
then it's stiff. So
Yeah.
it's like a trade-off, right?
Right.
You could put fancy fillers in there that'll make it really strong and then mechanically strain them at both ends so that this filler is your strain relief rather than the conductors. And then you can make a small conductor, but it costs way more to assemble.
Yeah, and then what ultimately happens, what you find out when you do that, is that it pulls out of the connector because the connector ain't got nothing to grab onto.
It's hard to do.
The cable itself is strong because you have a member in there that won't allow it to stretch.
Right.
But that's what makes it pull out of a connector.
Yeah.
Because you can't grab on to the outer jacket anymore because the member is inside the cable. So people are pulling on a cable or actually tugging on the outer jacket, but the inner members are what's holding it together to the solder joint. So anyway, the bottom line is that, that's why you find most of these companies that don't make cables for a living are just getting something made probably in China. There's just a molded connector.
Yeah, they tell them I want it cheap.
And they just call it a day. And it's just way easier. Right. You just need they're not focused on that part of it.
and it just comes with one connector. It's like, you get fancy. It's like,
Or they lob
1/8
it off.
inch and 1/4 inch, the screw-on
Oh,
kind or
right.
something. Oh, yeah, we cover 2 bases, right?
Yeah, or you can lob off you could have them molded with like an 1/8 inch or 3.5 millimeter. And then if someone wants a 4-pin, you just lob it off and
Well,
put
you
it
can
on there.
Yeah.
You can get cables made totally assembled for such incredibly cheap prices that's economical to do.
Right.
And that's the reality.
Or some companies just put 2-3 cables in a box because again
They're so cheap.
They're so cheap.
Yeah.
But when you're hand assembling and hand making cables here in the U.S. like we do, the cable itself is made in the U.S. The cable,
The
conductor,
conductor,
everything.
and the cable to assemble.
done here.
Right.
And then we assemble it in house. So what we're saying is that it's a whole different process, and it's expensive, but yet the results show. I mean, people know, like with our headphones, they pretty much know that if the stock cable is exceptional, and to go beyond that is difficult.
Yeah, you really don't need to replace it.
Yeah,
So that's nice.
it's good, and they hold
Yeah.
up over time and all that. So, but again, we're fortunate that we have 30 some years in the biz of making cables. So we know how to write the spec. Bring us to the beginning of the video. We know how to do that. And that's why you see, and even then some people say, well, I don't like this cable. I don't like that cable.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I mean, we're also small enough and the volume's low enough where we're not, we don't need to make 1 million of them, because making 1 million cables by hand, wouldn't
Yeah.
be very practical.
And even at our level of experience, I mean, our favorite, softest, supple cables are completely handmade from the inside out. I mean, other than the conductor materials and the conductor being insulated, but we're doing a similar thing. We're making the cable from the inside. Our higher end cables are made like that because you can't have a machine extrude these various insulations and jacket materials and give you that kind of feel. It won't happen. You know what I mean? You have to find all these different components that go together to make a cable feel supple. It's really difficult you can't go to a cable manufacturer who extrudes plastics and go, I want a supple feeling cable. See, now that's a subjective term.
Right.
They can't
They
punch
don't know
that
what that
in the
means.
machine
Yeah.
and
Oh.
it won't spit out a supple
It's not
cable.
a spec?
Yeah, no, it's not a spec. So they have no
But
idea.
It's like everything. The reality is the product needs to be manufactured. And you could say whatever you want, but if you go to a manufacturer that makes cables, they typically make huge amounts of cables. You could even be a large manufacturer of headphones, shipping huge numbers a year. You go to a cable manufacturer, you give them an impossible spec, maybe it'd be the best cable ever, but they're going to say, we can't make this.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
They literally will not make it for you at any price.
And
It doesn't even matter.
if you have the money to pay them to try to make it,
Right.
you'll probably hit a dead end.
If
at
you're a
some point.
$1 trillion company and you have a large amount of experience with this company and you've been dealing with them for a long time, they're probably going to say, well, for you, we'll try, but it's going to cost a fortune.
Well,
and it might not work.
NASA runs into this because they always have these, it's not only NASA, it's manufacturers that deal with precision anything.
Yeah.
And they need, at the beginning I brought up did you ever see those transatlantic cables they make?
Yeah, they're incredible. They're so complex.
Freaking believable. And to me, actually, they don't seem all that expensive
They're really
for what
cheap.
they are. I mean, they're making what,
Yeah,
a million
a lot.
miles of
Yeah,
this stuff. It's on a ship on this huge reel. They're laying it in the bottom of the ocean for.
Right,
it's even got a lifespan.
It lays there for like 100 years.
No, I
It's
think it's only
amazing.
good for. It's got like a 20. It's not even that
Is
long.
it
Yeah.
only 20
I don't know if
years?
it's 20 or 30, but I'm surprised, and I'm thinking they got all these layers of like killer insulation are this thick. I'm like,
Yeah.
ultimately the seawater actually penetrates the best
Yeah.
shit they have to build the cable out.
Uh-huh.
The cable's like this big.
It's huge, yeah.
Yeah, and
We're
it's just
talking about
layers of steel
Well,
cable.
back in the
built
day,
in.
so
yeah.
much.
Yeah, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, I remember like the first few times they did it, they couldn't do it. They laid it, they got like 3/4 of the way across, and then the cable broke, and then it was like, we got to do it again. So it took like 4 times before they actually could make it across.
Yeah, and wasn't what the one video I saw too on this they were doing? I said they ran a thing which is kind of funny. They made a cable, put it in through the ocean, and it didn't work.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right.
Now, I forgot what was off on it, but they didn't think about
that was like
it
the
dielectric
first transatlantic.
constant?
It was the impedance, I believe.
The
Yeah.
impedance of the
Yeah, I
cable?
believe it was
I forgot what they said it was, but
well, I mean, guess capacitance. But the
I don't know.
the strange thing is, they tested it and everything seemed fine. But this was obviously very early days. And my understanding this was for telegraph. And they said the maximum data rate they could get through, the number
yeah.
of,
Beep, beep, beep,
Yeah.
beep.
yeah, the number of characters per minute or however you rate it was so incredibly low because of how slow the cable was, because of the length.
Yeah.
Because, the slew rate effectively was so incredibly low because they didn't anticipate.
Yeah, they never took it into account.
Right.
Mm.
Now, this is obviously very early days, so they didn't have active electronics to overcome these things. But
That's true.
yeah, all the cables now are glass, fiber
Yeah.
optic
Yeah.
stuff.
Solves
It's
that
less of
problem.
an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I know this is a thing. It always comes back to guitars somehow, but guitar cables are the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, the longer they are, it changes what it sounds like. I know, like I think
And
it
they're
was
microphonic.
Yeah, well, yeah,
It's
but
got so much gain.
like
there.
Santana, he liked this. He was used to the sound of like they had like 100-foot cable on stage or whatever, so he could walk around.
Yeah.
And he was so used to it that when they switched to wireless, it didn't sound the same.
Oh, right.
So they actually put a switch in to simulate the cable length, so it sounded the same over
Makes
wireless.
sense.
Yeah, if you have enough cable, it makes a difference.
And that's his sound, man. You
Yeah.
don't want to change this guy like
Yeah,
that.
he did not want to change it.
Playing for 50 some years. Nope.
Yep.
But it really is a feat. Cables are complex, and there's a YouTube channel. I believe it's Charger Lab. He mostly tears down charger brick things that people plug into the wall and don't think about again. But he also tore down a bunch of cables, and like Apple cables, like standard cables, people get in a box and complain that
That's
for
tricky, man.
$14 are too
They
expensive.
do a pretty
or whatever.
good job with those cables, if you ask
They're
me.
phenomenal. They got
Yeah.
like these little stamped laser welded metal shells with like 3 injection molds so the cable holds together, but it's because they want to make it small, thin, flexible, and still pretty
That'll
durable.
get you every time.
Right?
Yeah.
Because obviously you can make it work and it's like a foot thick, it would be fine. It would be
Sure.
super durable, but who's going to want to use a cable that's super thick? So they do sort of almost engineering marvels
That's
to be able to make
it's
a cable
tough
that
to
cheap.
make a
Well, and
cable
it needs
small.
to be manufacturable.
Yeah, because they got to make millions of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's why like HDMI cables. Oh my, like 40 pins, all little wires. You know.
Yeah, right. And you got to believe. I mean, these manufacturers, they don't want it to fail. I mean,
Oh,
they
yeah. Of
don't
course not.
want it to fail. They want it to last as long as they can. It's not
Right.
like it's a plus for them to sell you another cable. I don't think they look at it that way. None of us do. None of us want
Apple's
it to
not
fail.
making their money on selling replacement charger
Yeah,
cables
no.
for iPhones.
Right. Agreed.
They don't really care.
Yeah, right. So I mean, but it's tough because you're trading off. There's always trade-offs
Right.
in everything you do, and flexibility and miniaturization and all this stuff.
I mean, even availability.
is a
Right?
trade-off.
You know.
Yeah, you can make it last forever, but it's probably either going to be very, very, very expensive or stiff. So, well, which one do you pick?
So I hope that answers your question as to why some cables come with headphones are worse than others. And it goes for anything. It's not just
Yeah.
headphones, it's everything.
Almost always money, though.
Yeah,
like
it
everything.
boils down to, if you can just throw it in a box and it's cheap enough, then
Right.
that's what you got. That's the way you go. And, I guess manufacturers like that, they just expect you're going to go to the aftermarket and get something you like. And you could do that nowadays. There's all kinds of flavors to buy. So
Yep.
when you hear that, bottom line is it's not necessarily a negative if the headphone's good. It's just expect to spend a few more bucks on a better cable.
You could get pretty good cables
know?
affordably from third parties. So,
Yeah.
Or you could try your own hand at it, right?
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy enough to do.
And learn all
That's
these
right.
things.
There you go.
That's right.
All the pitfalls of making cables.
Yeah, buy some conductor,
Yeah.
weave it, whatever you
Some
want to
people
do.
that. Yeah, have at it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun.
Soldering's key there. And strain relief.
Especially with little 2.4 millimeter connectors.
Yeah, you'll melt the
2.5.
shit out of the first dozen or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of tricky.
Buy a
sometimes.
10-pack. On that note, everyone, thank you for watching. Thumbs us up. And click subscribe because we always have new stuff coming.